What's going on, everybody? Captain Hindsight here. I just got finished with my Octedgar Allan Poeber Part 1 video, and I was looking at every single poem and every single short story and the essay as well. And then about halfway through, I realized that was going to be a really long video, and so I decided after the fact to split it in half, and I wanted to make just a little disclaimer video at the beginning of both of these videos just to let you know what's going on. So if there's a weird cut at the end of this video, just know there's going to be a continuation in the other one. But I did want to look at every single piece that's on the list because I know not everybody's going to read all of them, and I just want everybody that is participating to have some discussion to come to. And so I'll put the timestamps below for this poems video. You can jump around to all the ones that you did read, and then if you're still feeling really jazzed about Edgar Allan Poe, you can hop on over to the short story and essay video. But for now, let's just hop into those poems, and hope you enjoyed your reading this week. See ya. Hello and welcome to part 1 of Octedgar Allan Poeber. When I made the reading list video, I was honestly expecting it to be me and like 1 or 2 other people, but all of a sudden this weekend I got a huge response. A lot of people came over from Steve Donahue's channel, so thanks Steve for that. But I'm really excited to have all of you participating. I think this is going to be a really fun month. I've enjoyed this first part of the read-along, and I hope you did too. Now this first part definitely has the greatest amount of poems and short stories and essays, so I really wanted this to be a good intro to Edgar Allan Poe's work. So I'm excited just to see how people run with that. I didn't expect anybody to get too deep into any of these. I just thought it'd be a good place for all of us to just get the ball rolling and just really read some Edgar Allan Poe. So I hope you took it that way, and with that being said, there's definitely a lot to talk about here. I have about 6 pages of notes, but let's get into it. So first off, the poems. I will be looking down a lot here. I wrote a lot of notes out about these things. Now, I'm not necessarily a poetry expert. In fact, out of all the literary forms, I'm probably least familiar with poems. So it was kind of cool to go into this with that mindset of just being a beginner and trying to grasp what I can. So for the first poem here, we're looking at Lenore. So a shorter version of this poem was first published in 1831 under a different name, and it didn't even have a reference to Lenore specifically. And then later the name Lenore came into play in 1843, and then the final version was published in 1845. Now, one quote that came up over and over and over with Edgar Allan Poe was, "The death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world." And so with Lenore, that really gets that theme going. This poem is surprisingly optimistic regarding death. Guy de Vere is hoping to meet Lenore again in heaven. He's hoping she's in a better place, so he doesn't cry because of this hope. I liked the varied rhythm that this poem had, and I also liked the fact that it had these multiple couplets, and then the end of each stanza ended in these triplets, and so it had that unified theme going for it and kept the play moving on at a very nice pace. And I liked also the fact that there was repetitions on the last triplets of the first, third, and fourth stanzas, I believe, just so all of those different subject matters were really highlighted. The other thing that I really liked is the fact that Guy de Vere and Lenore are technically the subjects, more Lenore than Guy de Vere, but neither of them are narrators of this poem. And so that allows the dialogue to portray everyone's emotions, and it doesn't have to be just about them. It kind of opens up to the surroundings and everybody else that kind of had a relationship with Lenore and how that all comes together after her death. I thought that was a cool way to do it, and I appreciated that a lot about this poem. Moving on to The City and the Sea. This was first published in 1831. It went from The Doomed City, and then it was The City of Sin, and finally Edgar Allan Poe landed on The City and the Sea. I read in a lot of places, like with the beautiful women quote, that Poe hated allegory, and he thought that there wasn't really a place for it in his writing, or any writing in general. And so where this entire story could be interpreted as a metaphor for something else, because he had that viewpoint, I don't know how much we can grasp onto that overall. But that being said, he did not shy away from symbolism. This play took on a very strange and eerie setting. It was a city set in the West, and like West being the end of the day, you could tell that west is supposed to represent the end of life as well. A quote that was particularly interesting was, "Where the good and the bad and the worst and the best have gone to their eternal rest." And so that shows that in this strange city, not only is it bad people in life, it's good people in life too. It kind of is all encompassing. And therefore, when you get that reference to death looking down, he's looking down on everybody. And I think that's really powerful imagery because it really just symbolizes that no matter what type of person you are, you're just going to have the same outcome as pretty much everybody else. The imagery is great here, describing the town and the towers. There are a couple lines here that I thought were really great for describing this city. "No rays from the holy heaven come down on the long night time of that town. Resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie." Everything is seemingly calm and dark, but then all of a sudden you get to the last stanza and things quicken quite a bit, and there are a lot of exclamation points flying everywhere, but lo, a stir is in the air. It continues, "The waves have now a redder glow," and further on, "Down, down, that town shall settle hence. Hell rising from 1,000 thrones shall do it reverence." So that's what kind of got me confused. Hell reveres death, and if that's the case, this feels a little bit like an opposite of Lenore with that imagery there. But regardless, there was just plenty of great imagery in this poem, and I really enjoyed it for that aspect overall. Next, we're moving on to Eldorado, first published in 1849. Now, Eldorado is referencing a mythical city of gold, and I looked up a little about that, and it seems like that myth has changed a lot over time, but that specific detail about it is really important for this poem. It's very short, just 4 6-line stanzas. The word shadow is on every 3rd line, and Eldorado is on every 6th. And it sounded really familiar to me as I read it. I think my grandpa had recited it a time or two. Eldorado is actually the name of a John Wayne film from 1966. And this poem in particular is recited throughout the whole thing. And my grandpa was a big John Wayne fan, so I think that probably could have tied in quite a bit, but I just felt like it had a familiar quality to it. And I know that it's been referenced in a lot of other pieces of media, but I think that's where I had heard it before. One interesting event to point out here, from 1848 to 1855, America was totally enamored with the California gold rush. And so this supposedly was Poe's reaction to that event. And this was one of his last poems as well. So it's kind of interesting that when we think of all of the significant historical moments of our lives, we never really think of the gold rush because it's kind of past our generation. But for him, it would have been a big deal, and it would have been something that would change the entire makeup of the country because people are leaving from the East to try and strike it rich in the West. To me, the poem seems to assert that fulfillment was not found in earthly riches. It seemed to kind of lead toward the end where that Eldorado would actually be found in the afterlife. And so I thought that was particularly powerful, but maybe you have a different interpretation than I do. Next, I did read The Haunted Palace. It was first published in 1839, but apparently this poem is part of The Fall of the House of Usher, so I will wait to discuss that for when we get to The Fall of the House of Usher in part 3. Then we had A Valentine. This was supposedly written in 1846 and was presented the next day, and Edgar Allan Poe wasn't even there for that presentation, and it was probably for the best. This poem outright tells you that it's a riddle, and it's a scandalous one at that. It turns out this is an acrostic for Poe's Valentine at the time, which is really awkward because he was still married to his wife and cousin at that time, but this poem doesn't spell out Virginia, which is the name of his wife. Ugh. The secret code of the poem goes like this. You take the first letter of the first line, the second letter of the second line, the third letter of the third, and then it eventually spells out Francis Sargent Osgood, which was an American poet who Poe might have been having an affair with. A Valentine indeed. Next we had For Annie, which was written in 1849 for Nancy L. Richmond, which is kind of weird, but apparently Poe called her Annie. Though Poe's wife had passed away by this point, Nancy was still married to a man by the name of Charles B. Richmond, so Poe kind of had a complicated life with women from what I could tell. Now, Poe would stay with these two when he would lecture in Westford, Massachusetts, where they lived, and it seems like he got pretty close with Nancy during this time. In this poem, he Goes on talking extensively of the fever called living, which might be a reference to depression. I'm not quite sure on that, but it seems to be that he finds happiness in Annie. He goes on later to say, "She tenderly kissed me, she fondly caressed, and then I fell gently to sleep on her breast." Obviously, they were very close. Poe died the year after this was written, which was, again, 1849, but tellingly, Nancy changed her name to Annie after her husband passed away in 1873. Lastly, we had The Sleeper, which was first published in 1831. It was longer at the time and called Irene. It was shortened down to 60 lines in 1841, and the last version was published in 1845. This is yet another poem that focuses on the death of a beautiful woman, which, like I said, will probably be a pretty prevalent theme in a lot of Poe's work. But here, he talks to the subject of the poem in the afterlife. He loves her after she died, and apparently Poe considered this to be one of his superior poems. Supposedly, he wrote to an admirer, "In the higher qualities of poetry, it is better than The Raven, but there is not one man in a million who could be brought to agree with me in this opinion." So, obviously, The Raven had a big effect on Poe's life. It was a massive success at the time it was released, but he had some opinions on his own work, which I think anybody that really pursues any artistic endeavors can really relate to that, and so it's interesting that he chose this one in particular. It does have a lot of literary devices that English teachers would just salivate over. I have been reading a lot of Shakespeare, so I felt the rhythm of each line right away, but this is actually in iambic tetrameter as opposed to iambic pentameter, which is what Shakespeare employed in his plays. Basically what that means is each line has an alternating pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, but in an iambic pentameter, it actually has about 10 syllables per line, and with the iambic tetrameter, it has about 8. This poem is also chock full of alliteration, and so I'm just going to read the first couple lines here, and I'm going to really stress these syllables quite a bit and be that dumb English teacher, but I think you'll get a feel for both the alliteration and that rhythm of each line with these first two lines. And so at the beginning it goes, "At midnight in the month of June, I stand beneath the mystic moon." And so there you see there was already a couple instances of alliteration, and with those stressed syllables, I think you get the picture. Whew, we're marathoning.